Tonight we're heading somewhere you've never been, and honestly might not survive if you really were there, the dusty, spice-scented rooftop of a medieval Indian observatory high above the flickering oil lamps and mango groves. It's midnight. The monsoon has just passed, the sky is ink black and velvet smooth, and the stars, well, they're not just twinkling prettily. Up here they're talking. Not in words, of course, but in positions, patterns, winks and streaks, and you're here to listen. A robed monk who smells strongly of turmeric and slightly of sleep deprivation hands you a bronze astrolabe. It's heavier than you thought. He says nothing, just nods toward a low, stone bench beside an elaborate carved pillar, a gnomon you'll learn later used for casting shadows at noon, which seems comically irrelevant right now. You sit, the air is warm, you can hear jackals in the distance. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your eyes adjust slowly. The monk, let's call him Raghava, starts murmuring under his breath in Sanskrit, marking small dots on a palm leaf manuscript. You squint upward. There's Orion, his belt neat and tight. There's Scorpio sprawling across the southeast like he owns the night. And there, tilted just so, is what the Indian astronomers called Rohini, one of the 27 nakshatras or lunar mansions, their version of the zodiac, except a bit moodier. You glance sideways. Raghava has brought out a long staff capped with brass and strung with tiny weights, a sanku, a traditional time stick used to sight angles. He peers through its notches, aligning it with a star whose name you couldn't pronounce even with caffeine. Then he makes a faint which could mean interesting or we're doomed, and jots down more notes. That's when you start to realize these astronomers didn't just look at the stars, they danced with them. They talked back, they assigned them gods and stories, and let's be honest, a surprising amount of bureaucratic responsibility. Take, for example, the daily schedule. This observatory operates on a division of time so granular it would make modern planners cry. Medieval Indian astronomers used something called a muhurta, roughly 48 minutes long, and a full night might be split into several of these little chunks. Each muhurta was good for certain kinds of rituals, or in your case, certain kinds of star measuring. You're in the third one right now, which is ideal for lunar tracking and very bad for marriage proposals. Don't ask how we know that. You get the sense that time here isn't just something to pass, it's something to measure with an obsessive, affectionate intensity. Time is tracked with water clocks, ghati, yantra, sundials you obviously can't use right now, and sand timers flipped with the solemnity of a royal edict. Raghava's timer is carved from coconut shell inlaid with mother of pearl and hums faintly when the sand falls right. He flips it. The grains fall like whispering prayers, and the next phase begins. You're handed a worn cloth bound in thread, inside of which is a sky map, older than some countries. No telescopes, those were still centuries away, but instead a kind of spherical geometry based on layered guesswork, rigorous observation, and divine patience. You read the text aloud in your head. It talks about the position of Mars or Mangala tonight. Supposedly he's in the house of Capricorn. You glance up. There he is, an orange flicker above the neem tree. And in medieval Indian cosmology, this isn't just a fiery rock in the void. It's an angry warrior one who's excellent at motivating kings and also causing bloody noses. Interpret that how you will. And that's part of the charm and confusion of the night. Astronomy here doesn't sit neatly apart from astrology. It's more like a cozy cohabitation with shared chores and joint custody of the sky. Astronomers like Varāhamihira and Aryabhata were mathematicians and star readers, yes, but also advisors, storytellers, and sometimes reluctant magicians. Did Jupiter's position really help predict floods? Maybe. Historians still argue whether these calculations were truly scientific or just sophisticated spiritual guesses with very good PR. But no one can deny this, their methods were precise. Indian astronomers tracked planetary motion with sign tables centuries before trigonometry showed up in Europe. They even noted the Earth's rotation subtly, quietly, without sparking too many theological arguments. Aryabhata, that cheeky genius from the 5th century, claimed the stars only seemed to move because the Earth spun. You imagine the scandal. Ragava has started humming again. A sleepy chant, rhythmic and low. Maybe it helps him focus, or maybe it's to scare off mosquitoes. You ask him half asleep what he's hoping to see tonight. He shrugs. Maybe a star I've never met, maybe nothing, maybe everything. It's not helpful, but it's calming. Nearby, another student has fallen asleep with his head on a geometry slate. Someone else is gently poking at a charcoal brazier, warming sesame oil for tea. The scent of ginger curls around you, mixing with smoke and the odd comforting aroma of old paper and beeswax. You're not quite sure if this is science or ritual devotion or data collection, but it's undeniably something beautiful, something ancient, something softly, stubbornly curious. You glance back at Mars, still there, still glowing, still angry. The hourglass has finished its slow, whispering fall, and Ragava flips it with a practiced flick, the way someone flips a dosa pan after 1,000 breakfasts. You're now in the 4th muhurta of the night. If you were back at the palace, this would be the perfect time for composing poetry or plotting minor rebellion. But up here on the hill, it means time for the next batch of star measurements using a mixture of geometry, poetry, and sand. Because yes, aside from water clocks and bronze instruments, medieval Indian astronomers sometimes used sand-filled timers to measure time intervals with unsettling accuracy. These ghati yantras were not the delicate hourglasses of a European study, but gourd-shaped containers that released water, or sometimes fine sand, through a hole of exacting diameter. Someone had to sit there and keep track, counting breaths or heartbeats, or in some cases reciting specific verses that conveniently took just the right amount of time. Imagine syncing your data collection to a Sanskrit poem about elephants. You're doing that now. Lucky you. You hold a wax-coated slate on which someone's drawn a grid with fine chalk. It's a star map, homemade and updated nightly. Every dot, every line matters. The chart shifts through the seasons, and like the tide or your general mental health, it can be very moody. Tonight, the constellations are particularly crisp. You trace the curve of Pushya, a nakshatra thought to bring nourishment and growth. In ancient agricultural records, kings supposedly scheduled the planting of certain crops based on which nakshatra was dominant. And it wasn't superstition alone over time. They'd linked these sky patterns with recurring climate patterns, monsoon timing, even pest activity. Historians still argue whether this was empirical observation or just confirmation bias with a 100-year head start, but you have to admit it's compelling. You set your sights on a star peeking just above the temple spire. Ragava hands you a measuring stick. It's not fancy, just 2 lengths of polished bamboo marked with rings and string, but it works. You align the string with the star sight down the stick like a sleepy sniper and give a small nod. That's your job now. Nod, scribble, check. Repeat. Ancient astronomy, surprisingly full of paperwork. Behind you, a girl in saffron robes is chanting the time. Not the exact hour, no one says 1:43 a.m. here, but the moment's identity, 12th part of the night, under Pushya, waning moon, 4th muhurta, wind from the southwest. In other words, time is not just measured, it's named, flavored, contextualized. Every moment has a texture, a mood, and, yes, a matching set of recommendations. Good time to study the moon, bad time to argue with your in-laws. Sounds silly, but then you look back at the sand timer still falling with smooth elegance. You glance up at the stars exactly where they were expected to be, and suddenly it doesn't seem silly at all. Next to you, someone is sketching. You peek. It's not a star map. It's an instrument diagram. You recognize the circular frame and rotating disc of an astrolabe. But here's the twist. This isn't a drawing of an existing one. This is a design, a plan. You're watching someone invent a new variant maybe for measuring eclipses or predicting monsoon onset. And that's the thing, people assume medieval science was just about repeating what old texts said. But these stargazers, they innovated, they tinkered. One guy famously invented an equatorial ring dial while drunk on fermented jaggery. It did not work, but he tried. As you listen to the soft scrape of charcoal on palm leaf, you learn another secret. Astronomers here didn't work in isolation. Observatories were often funded by kings and staffed like sleepy laboratories. There were math experts, Sanskrit scribes, monks who timed rituals, and apprentices like you, learning by doing and occasionally by spilling ink on irreplaceable scrolls. Ragava still hasn't forgiven you for that. You hear a tiny bell. Someone has brought food. It's not glamorous rice, lentils, or pickle so spicy it makes your nose regret its existence, but it's enough to sustain a night under the stars. You eat sitting cross-legged on a cold stone floor, your slate beside you, the smell of cumin mixing with the scent of the night, jasmine blooming nearby. Then the breeze picks up. A soft sigh from the west. You glance at the tall staff with the ribbon tied to the top, an improvised wind gauge. The ribbon flutters, then calms. A note is made, wind direction has shifted slightly. This too is recorded. Because the astronomers believe the sky is not separate from the world. It is the world's mirror, its pulse, its weather, its warning system. Do you feel it? Ragava murmurs. Mars is lower than last night. You nod slowly. You don't really, but you want to. You're starting to think like an astronomer, not someone who stares at space, but someone who listens to it breathe. Somewhere far below the city is asleep. Dogs bark occasionally. A flute plays briefly, then fades. But up here, the only soundtrack is the rustle of robes, the scraping of inked brushes on dried palm, and the endlessly gentle crunch of sand falling through a timepiece made centuries before your birth. It's almost enough to make you forget how sleepy you are. Your eyes are finally adjusting to the sky, not just seeing stars, but noticing how they change, how they blink, not with mood, but with science. And yet, somehow with mood too. Tonight, the moon is misbehaving. She's in her waning crescent phase, rising late and faint like an actress, making an underwhelming entrance. Still, Raghava watches her with fascination, even as he slurps a cold cup of chai that's mostly ginger foam by now. You shift your gaze. The moon hangs low, her light smudging the edges of nearby stars, a silver ghost casting long shadows from the temple tower down onto the parchment in your lap. This isn't just about aesthetics. In medieval Indian astronomy, the moon matters more than you probably guessed. See, unlike modern systems that revolve around the sun, thanks Copernicus, Indian calendars were lunar-solar hybrids, balancing the moon's monthly whims with the solar year. Every 30 days or so, the lunar calendar would drift slightly, nudging festivals, throwing shade at agriculture, and generally making priests lose sleep. But they had a fix, an extra month added every few years to set things straight, like sneaking an extra Thursday into your calendar, so Holi doesn't fall in the middle of the wheat harvest. It's called Adhik Mars, and yes, it's astronomy's equivalent of a clerical loophole. So when the moon acts out, rising late, disappearing early, being all mysterious, it's not just poetic. It's a scheduling crisis. Someone's uncle is about to get married under the wrong moon, and there will be consequences. You squint upward and measure the moon's arc against the side of the gnomon. It's not quite where the star chart said she'd be. Not enough to panic, but enough for a raised eyebrow. Or in Raghava's case, a long disapproving sip of lukewarm tea. And yet this is also the fun part. Medieval Indian astronomers thrived in this margin of unpredictability. They tracked the moon with such obsessive precision that several texts like the Surya Siddhanta contain lunar motion tables with corrections so finicky they read like grumpy footnotes. You even see terms like Mandakana and Sigra-Kana corrections for the moon's slow and fast anomalies. You write them down, though you're pretty sure Manda also describes your current mental state. Then there's the tide of belief that washes over the science. Because the moon wasn't just a rock in orbit, she was a personality, a deity, a regulator of emotions and digestion and, most crucially, relationships. Whole astrological systems revolved around what the moon was doing the moment you were born. There's even a theory that certain moon phases increase your chances of eloping successfully. You look at the sky again, trying to assess your odds. Of course, modern astronomers raise eyebrows at this. Historians still argue whether the entire astrological overlay helped or hindered the progress of Indian science. Was it superstition, piggybacking on observation, or was it a cultural necessity, a way to ensure people cared about the data? Tonight you can't quite tell where the measurement ends and the myth begins. And you're okay with that. You flip to a palm leaf page filled with half-erased symbols. It's a record of previous moons, their behavior across months, across years. You imagine a line of astronomers before you, all under this same sky, muttering the same complaints about faint moons, smudged readings, and ink that refuses to dry. You're part of that chain now, whether you like it or not. A soft rustle draws your attention to a side alcove where one of the temple's Brahmin assistants is setting up a ritual. Not a full ceremony, just a quiet offering to Chandra, the moon god, a brass dish of ghee, a splash of milk, a few jasmine petals, and a chant so gentle you almost mistake it for humming. This too is part of the observatory. Here, science and devotion lie down together like slightly mismatched spouses who've agreed not to argue before dawn. One side counts angles, the other offers prayers, and both keep an eye on the moon, who still hasn't told anyone what she's thinking. You glance back at your own chart. Time to note the moon's altitude. Ragava hands you a small measuring board with angled notches and a weighted string, the ancient equivalent of a protractor, but with a bit more flair. You hold it up to the skyline up the edges and let the string dangle. It points slightly off the expected arc. You frown, he frowns. You both scribble in silence. "That's not right," someone says behind you. A young monk nose buried in a roll of stitched bark paper, looking up only long enough to squint suspiciously at the moon. "That's not where she was last month." Ragava shrugs. Maybe she's in a mood. Everyone laughs a little, but then they go back to measuring, noting, sipping tea, because mood or not, the moon will rise again tomorrow, and they'll be here waiting for her, watching, measuring the sky. And maybe if she feels like it, she'll behave. You lean back, the stone warm against your spine. The breeze carries the scent of dried herbs and old ink. And as you close your eyes for just a moment, the moon drifts a little higher, casting a crooked smile on everything she touches, even you. There's a silence now, more settled than before, like the observatory itself is exhaling. You sit cross-legged, half-wrapped in a woolen shawl someone loaned you when they noticed your modern jacket wasn't cutting it anymore. The stone under you has cooled, but your mind's warmed by moonlight and something spicier, still the thrill of seeing a sky full of questions. It's not a shooting star. This one is too slow, too thick. It glows red at the edges like someone's drawn a smear of fire across the night with a smudgy thumb. Everyone in the observatory stops. Even the sleepy Brahmin assistant pauses mid-chant. You stare at the sky heart climbing a little. A comet. Ragava squints, then mutters something under his breath in Sanskrit that you're pretty sure translates to, well, that's inconvenient. Because in medieval Indian thought, comets were trouble, literal omens. They weren't just cosmic snowballs, they were the sky's angry scribbles, warnings, flung from the gods when something big was about to go wrong, usually plague, war, or political scandal. Fun. These fiery visitors had names: Ketu or Dhumaketu, the smoke-bannered one. According to texts like the Brihat Samhita, comets were catalogued like rogue, visitors' size, color, direction of travel duration. Some were good omens, rarely. Most were not. You glance at the chart being scribbled beside you. Ragava is already tracking it. Date, position, angle, direction. It's his job to figure out what kind of trouble this comet might mean. A famine, a change in dynasty, or maybe the sudden popularity of fermented gooseberry wine, which no one here will admit, is slowly trending among monks. But the worry is real. In the 10th century, for example, a comet sighting was recorded in the same year as a major drought. Historians still argue whether this was post-event rationalizing or whether people genuinely noticed climate patterns matching comet appearances. Either way, you suddenly feel very invested in this particular glowing tale, not causing your dinner to get cancelled. There's more. Raghava clears his throat and launches into a tale you did not expect at this hour. Once he says a king ignored a comet. You raise an eyebrow. He saw it in the eastern sky and chose to continue his military campaign anyway. Within days, he lost 3 battles and contracted what the records call a boil of judgment on his left thigh. That last part is said with a completely straight face. You stare at Raghava for a moment. He just shrugs. You don't mess with comets. The atmosphere has shifted. Everyone's alert now, not frantic but charged like students before a surprise oral exam. They begin flipping through reference texts, some bark paper, others inked cloth. You even spot one fraying scroll written in red iron pigment, warning that a westward travelling comet in a dry season predicts the fall of proud leaders. Good luck explaining that in your monthly report. The girl who'd been sketching earlier is now consulting a weather record. Someone else lights an extra lamp. The observatory feels less sleepy, more like a command post. You feel oddly honoured to be present. A celestial event like this might be written about for years, or blamed for everything, or both. You sidle over to a junior student who whispers helpfully, "Don't worry, it's only bad luck if you haven't washed your hair this week."
What?
Oh yeah, unwashed hair attracts Ketu's tail. It's in the Parashara Samhita. You blink at him. I washed mine yesterday.
Close enough.
There's no sarcasm. He means it, and part of you suddenly wishes you'd used shampoo. So you sit the warm sandstone against your calves, the night alive with nervous ink scribbling, and above you this glowing interloper dragging its tail through the stars like it owns the place. A bell sounds. Tea again, but this time the ginger is stronger and someone's added a hint of tulsi, calming herbs. You sip slowly and listen to Raghava mutter calculations under his breath like a bedtime spell. The night moves on, and comets, despite their drama, fade fast. You keep watching, almost disappointed as the streak loses intensity. In a few hours it'll be gone, a memory. A scribble on someone's chart. Still, it's hard not to feel like the sky just said something, what exactly no one agrees on, but it said it with fire, with flair. The comet has faded now, slipping westward like a disgruntled diva refusing an encore. The sky feels calmer in its absence. But not you. You're buzzing with a mixture of ginger tea speculation and the realization that your socks are slightly damp for some reason, probably comet-related. You've settled back at the corner of the observatory where one of the apprentices has unrolled a cloth embroidered with tiny golden threads. But this is no wall hanging, it's an astrological chart, not just any chart either. This one is for a wedding. See, the same astronomers who tracked lunar phases and comet tantrums also doubled as astrologers for royal families, merchants, and the occasional overly dramatic goat breeder. And yes, they absolutely used the stars to plan romantic affairs with the precision of a sniper and the subtlety of a mango to the face. You peer closer. The chart is a square within a square segmented into houses and marked with elegant Devanagari script. It's a kundli, a birth chart compiled based on the exact time and place of someone's birth. And tonight someone is checking if this nobleman and his maybe fiancé are a cosmic match or just a future court scandal waiting to happen. The apprentice nudges you. Look, see Venus in the 7th house. That's good. You nod, pretending you know exactly what that means. Venus, or Shukra, was the planet of love, beauty, and awkwardly semen. Scholars took his presence very seriously when matchmaking. Saturn in the 7th house. Forget it. That's the celestial equivalent of matching someone who loves spicy food with someone whose intestines surrender after one chili. You learn that families, especially among the elite, would sometimes delay or even cancel weddings based on unfavorable astrological timings. Historians still debate whether this made society more stable or just more neurotic. But hey, if you've ever seen the real chaos of a mismatched couple, maybe Saturn's warning signs weren't so wrong. But there's more here than just marriages. This chart also includes entries in code, clever Sanskrit shorthand suggesting, well, extra romantic activity. One symbol, you're told, represents a hidden partnership. Another seems to suggest a temporary flirtation during the festival of Holi. You squint. Are the stars being used to plan affairs? The apprentice giggles sometimes, but we call them seasonal alignments.
Of course you do.
Turns out astrology wasn't just a noble pursuit, it was also an elite loophole, a cosmic cover story for social mischief. Want to delay your taxes? Bad planetary timing. Want to break off an engagement without insulting the bride's uncle Mercury in retrograde? Want to meet your secret lover under cover of lunar darkness? Just say the nakshatras demand it. You start to realize something slightly unsettling. These astronomers were essentially medieval data analysts, but instead of spreadsheets and Python scripts, they used palm leaves, star positions, and epic levels of passive-aggressive cosmic storytelling.
And if you're thinking, surely the kings didn't believe this, and think again.
A nearby text, a hefty wood-bound thing, records how a 12th century king delayed launching a military campaign by 2 whole months because Mars and Saturn were squaring off like rival chefs in a reality show. When the alignment finally cleared, he won the battle. Historians still argue whether this was clever manipulation of morale or a divine coincidence, but either way, the stars got credit. Back at your corner, a young scholar is now trying to match a dream someone had with a planetary alignment. He's cross-referencing a page of strange glyphs, elephants on fire, talking crows, a river of milk. You try to act like this is normal because apparently it is. Dream interpretation was occasionally woven into this whole astronomical astrological tapestry, especially when royal families were involved. Your dream last week about a talking mango might have made it into a minor footnote, or more likely, a recommendation for less ginger tea before bed. Then you hear the story of the astrological divorce. Ragava, who's now sitting cross-legged on a folded wool mat and absolutely stealing someone else's banana snack, recounts a tale from the 9th century. A noblewoman petitioned for divorce on astrological grounds, claiming her husband's Rahu was oppressively dominant in their shared kundli. Somehow the court agreed. You blink. Did she get remarried, you ask? Ragava shrugs, to someone whose Jupiter was more cooperative.
You can't tell if he's joking.
But that's the line here. In medieval India, the line between science, myth, politics, and personal life wasn't a line at all. It was a tapestry, woven from logic, story, ritual, and a little bit of clever celestial spin. The stars weren't distant. They were personal. They didn't just mark time, they marked moods, possibilities, choices, and sometimes excuses. You lie back, the cloth of the wedding chart crinkling gently beneath you. Above the stars, are sharp again, the moon now hiding behind a thin cloud. Somewhere in the distance, a temple bell rings once. A quiet hour. A sly hour. A good time, perhaps, to send a love letter in code, masked as a horoscope. Or maybe just to close your eyes and dream of constellations whispering secrets you were never meant to fully understand. The stars have shifted ever so slightly, and with them the mood of the observatory. Gone is the tension of the comet. In its place, a kind of quiet mechanical focus, like tuning a lute in the dark. Ragava motions you over with a sideways tilt of his head, then uncovers something you've been waiting to see all night, the astrolabe.
It's beautiful.
You expected something dull and brassy, but this, it gleams like a moon slice in the lamplight. Brass and silver etched with tiny Sanskrit characters along intricate rings. It's round, heavy, and slightly warmer than you'd expect, like it's been holding the heat of all those past hands that touched it before yours. You hold it carefully.
It feels alive, like a spinning puzzle that knows secrets.
This, Ragava says, is how we talk to the sky. The medieval Indian astrolabe, based on ancient Persian and Greek designs but modified with local flair, was a handheld universe. layers of metal delicately inscribed with celestial coordinates, movable plates to model the heavens, and a rotating pointer called the alidade that lets you sight stars and calculate altitude. It's like a smartphone from 1100 AD, except instead of TikTok, it shows you when the next eclipse is due and whether Venus is ruining your love life. You turn the ornate star map on top, and align it with the sky. The stars are where they should be. Raghav nods in approval, as if you just recited a particularly spicy couplet of poetry. You ask him what else it does. He gestures vaguely as if that's a silly question. Well, he starts, you can tell. Time predict eclipses, measure the sun's path, calculate prayer hours, chart planetary conjunctions, locate true north, determine high tide, find your latitude. You hold up your hand. Okay. Or he adds with a cheeky grin, figure out when to harvest mangoes.
Ah, yes, the important stuff.
Turns out the mango factor isn't even a joke. Seasonal fruit harvests were sometimes aligned with star positions. Certain nakshatras signaled optimal times for picking, planting, or shipping perishables before the monsoon. Historians still argue whether this was actual data-based agriculture or just a delicious superstition. Either way, you now crave a mango. The astrolabe feels almost too advanced for its time. But India's scientific minds weren't just watching stars for fun. They were calculating planetary motions with such precision that some suggest they had proto-calculus concepts before the West started scribbling signs. Case in point, the Kerala School of Astronomy and Mathematics, which would emerge a few centuries later, had been working with infinite series expansions that eerily resemble modern calculus. Their tools, geometry, cleverness, and yes, brass instruments, like this gleaming disc in your palm. You flip it over, more inscriptions. A name is carved on the back, Bhaskaracharya, or at least a version of his name. Bhaskara too was a 12th century genius who not only built on Aryabhata's astronomical models, but also wrote poetry about the Earth's rotation and why eclipses don't mean your grandma is going to die. He even composed love poetry laced with trigonometric references. Imagine thy angles acute, like the moon in Pisces, bringeth me sleepless nights. There's a fringe theory that some astrolabes included secret compartments, tiny scrolls or devotional messages tucked inside. A student nearby swears he once saw one unscrew in the middle to reveal a verse from the Bhagavad Gita, or a recipe for pickled lentils, depending on whom you ask. You begin to adjust the alidade, lining it up with Sirius, or Mrigashira as it's called here. The angle reads clean. You record it on a wax slate, smoothing the surface with your thumb first. The numbers, the metal, the sky, it all blends together in your head. Not quite science, not quite faith. Something in between. And then you realize something odd. No one's explaining how to use it in a straight line. There's no step one align. Instead, Raghav teaches it like a dance. A tilt of the wrist, a pause, a feel. You sense the rhythm behind it. Like music you've only just begun to hear. That's when another student pulls out his own astrolabe. It's smaller, made of copper instead of brass, and instead of Sanskrit, the markings are in Persian. You raise an eyebrow. From where? He smiles. Delhi, passed down. Turns out these tools traveled just like their users. Across India, across the Islamic world, across Asia. Scholars traded sky data the way we trade memes, bringing innovations from Baghdad to Bengal, mixing Greek, Indian, and Arabic wisdom into spinning, glinting plates of metal. You sit in silence for a while, the astrolabe still in your lap, the sky overhead, the soft clink of ink pots being set down, someone murmuring planetary positions like a bedtime lullaby. This isn't just a tool, it's a conversation between the heavens and the hand that holds it, between past and present, and if you're lucky, between logic and wonder. You finally set the astrolabe down, brushing a stray thread of cotton from its rim. It's heavy, but it doesn't feel like a burden.
It feels like knowing.
The air has shifted again, as it does between midnight and dawn. The stars have tilted westward, and now the moon, our slippery friend, hangs even lower, her arc sliding toward the treetops. Somewhere, a rooster mistakes the light for sunrise and crows too early. Everyone politely ignores him. Ragava calls the group together. Something is coming, not another comet, not a wedding chart,
An eclipse.
and with it an entire cast of mythical chaos. You shuffle over to the eastern edge of the observatory where a large circular chart has been etched into the stone floor. It's part compass, part calendar, and part drama stage. Because in medieval Indian astronomy, eclipses weren't just observed, they were anticipated, rehearsed, reenacted, and occasionally used as excuses to cancel school. At the center of the story, two shadowy troublemakers, Rahu and Ketu. Now in modern terms, these are the lunar nodes, mathematical points, where the moon's orbit intersects the ecliptic plane. That's where solar and lunar eclipses happen. But if that explanation just made your brain droop, don't worry. The ancients had a much spicier version. You sit cross-legged as Ragava begins to explain, half narrating, half performing. Long ago, during the churning of the cosmic ocean, Samudra Manthan, the gods and demons, teamed up to create the nectar of immortality. But surprised, the demons tried to cheat. One sneaky fellow disguised himself as a god and drank a drop of the nectar. Before it could reach his stomach, Vishnu lopped off his head. Dramatic, right? But because the demon had already tasted the nectar, his head and body couldn't die. The head became Rahu and the body Ketu. Now the two eternally chase the sun and moon across the sky, trying to swallow them in revenge. Whenever they catch them, boom, eclipse.
And you're about to help stage this tale, because apparently it's tradition to reenact it every time an eclipse approaches.
You're handed a simple mask, 2 eyes, and a giant grinning mouth painted on a coconut shell. This is Rahu. Lucky you. Another student ties a ragged shawl around their waist. That's Ketu, the headless body. Somehow they make it fashion. Together you chase a volunteer playing the moon around the courtyard until you catch her. There's dramatic groaning. Someone plays a conch. A coconut is cracked to symbolize the snapping of light. And the entire thing is witnessed by a sleepy cat that looks thoroughly unimpressed. Historians might call this fringe theater, but there's something deeper happening. These stories weren't just for laughs. They were a way of explaining the universe to a largely illiterate population, embedding astronomy into culture, ritual, memory. And even among scholars, these myths helped visualize complex astronomical principles.
Remember those lunar nodes? Yeah, that's Rahu and Ketu. They're not real planets, but they were given planetary status, Chaya Grahas, or shadow planets, because their positions in the sky mattered, not physically, but mathematically. Their motion was calculated, tracked, mapped.
You're handed a wax board with recent calculations, upcoming eclipse dates, angle of approach, lunar latitude. It's like a flight schedule for cosmic drama. You scratch in a few notes. Ragava peers over your shoulder and nods, close enough to scare the elephants. That's not a metaphor. In some ancient texts, it's recorded that royal elephants were moved indoors during eclipses lest they panic or absorb bad energy. You imagine a dozen elephants in a palace hallway, confused and mildly annoyed. You ask, did people really think Rahu was eating the moon? Ragava sips his tea and replies, depends. Do you believe in things that mess with your power but don't leave evidence? Touché. Eclipses were serious business. Entire temples would close. Pregnant women were told to stay indoors. No cooking, no eating, no bathing. The Grahan, or eclipse period, was a time for purification. And yes, more chanting. Always more chanting. Still the astronomers themselves. They calculated eclipses centuries in advance. Aryabhata's models in the 5th century accurately described why eclipses occurred based on the Earth's shadow and the moon's path, not demon heads. Yet even he didn't bother tearing the myth down. Why would he? The story served a purpose. It gave people something to hold on to in the dark. You sit now with a scroll in hand, running your finger over the trajectory of the upcoming eclipse. According to this, the sun will be partially obscured for 3 ghatis, roughly 1.5 hours. There will be chanting, fasting, shadow puppets possibly. You look up. The moon is still bright, still whole, still safe, but not for long. Ketu waits, Rahu watches, and in a few days the sky will darken at noon, and the people will point and whisper, and someone's grandmother will throw lentils at the horizon, just in case. And even if you know better, even if you know the math, you'll probably do the same, just in case. You're sitting now in the observatory's inner courtyard, surrounded by low-burning lanterns and sleeping scrolls. The stone walls have begun to sweat with dew, and someone nearby has pulled a blanket around their shoulders like a human burrito. You're about to learn astronomy's most forbidden truth. Chai is essential. Raghava hands you a steaming clay cup, its sides charred black, its rim just hot enough to keep you awake without third-degree enlightenment. You sip carefully. The tea is thick with ginger, cardamom, black pepper, tulsi leaves. And is that chili? Yes, chili. You blink, cough once, and your brain sits upright like a scolded parrot. Welcome to the 2:00 a.m. shift. And here's where things get wild. Because this, dear sky watcher, is when the real math begins. No more chasing the moon. No more reenacting mythological head removals with fruit. This is the hour for reckoning with numbers, not just any numbers, but loops, arcs, irregularities, curves that don't behave. You shuffle over to the main workspace where a young astronomer is bent over palm leaf manuscripts with a focus so intense it would terrify a squirrel. He's scrawling something onto a wooden board, rows of sign values, correction tables, little Sanskrit numerals, so tidy they look typed. You sit beside him and ask the most innocent of questions, "What's that?" He answers without looking up proto-calculus.
Oh, just that?
See, Indian astronomers weren't content to eyeball planetary movements and call it a day. They noticed something strange. The planets moved in weird loops, retrograde motion, where a planet like Mars would appear to move backwards in the sky before continuing its usual path. If that sounds like a cosmic prank, well, that's what it looked like too. But rather than blame Mercury's mood swings, scholars like Aryabhata, Brahmagupta, and later the Kerala school got to work. They didn't use the word calculus, of course. That's a European term that came much later. But they laid the groundwork. Infinite series approximations, limits all wrapped in poetic Sanskrit verses, because apparently nothing says precise planetary radius like a good metaphor about elephants and lotus flowers. The student next to you flips the leaf and shows you a series expansion for PPI. You recognize it, or at least the shape of it. It's eerily close to something Newton and Leibniz would describe 1,000 years later. Historians still argue whether these ideas were shared across continents or discovered independently. Some say Jesuit missionaries carried mathematical texts from India to Europe. Others believe these were parallel discoveries, different people staring at the same sky, trying to wrangle its chaos. But here's the kicker. The Kerala school even developed a form of differential calculus to help model planetary motion with better accuracy. You glance at the numbers, your eyes glaze slightly. The tea is doing its best, but this is a lot of sine A functions before sunrise. Raghava comes over, and in a rare moment of clarity says, "We had no time for bad math. The sky wouldn't wait." He's not wrong. The movement of heavenly bodies wasn't just for scholarly fun. It affected calendars, festivals, agriculture, trade routes, and political rituals. A miscalculation could throw an entire dynasty's reputation into question. If you told a king the eclipse would come at noon and it came at 100 p.m., well, you might be reassigning yourself to latrine duty for a decade. So they got it right. Or more accurately, they tried, again and again, with astonishing patience. Raghava unrolls a faded manuscript. It's a scene table, each value written out meticulously by hand. These were calculated using geometry and interpolation long before the concept of a calculator could save anyone. You run your finger along the arc of the numbers. There's something comforting about them. Like the sky wants to be understood, you just have to speak its language. And yet, not everyone agrees on the translations. One side scroll mentions epicycles, small circular paths overlaid on larger orbits to explain irregular movement. Another argues for elliptical motion. Yet another claims planetary speeds vary not just by position, but by proximity to specific nakshatras.
Even among the experts there's debate. Still,
Historians squint at these texts and wonder, was this just clever guesswork that happened to land close to the truth? Or were Indian scholars working with intuitive principles that skirted the edge of modern mathematics like dancers, tracing patterns they couldn't yet name? You don't know. You're too busy sipping more chili chai and trying not to burn your tongue on the concept of asymptotic convergence.
still you love this moment.
Because here, in the coldest stretch of the night, math feels strangely human. Not dry, not abstract, but personal. Born from centuries of backs hunched over stone tablets, eyes straining under oil lamps, hands smudged with soot and sandalwood. It's beautiful, chaotic, messy, and weirdly poetic, like the sky itself. You're walking now not far just from one part of the observatory to another, but it feels like a shift in universe. The night is thinning pale at the edges, the sky starting to smudge into a lighter blue. Your sandals scrape the stone, and Ragava waves you toward a quiet corner where a large, heavy-bound manuscript waits atop a sandalwood chest. This isn't about moon phases or calculus anymore.
This is about power.
And the surprising truth that medieval Indian astronomers weren't just scribbling in isolation, they were shaping statecraft. You sit down cross-legged again, and one of the senior students flips open the manuscript. It's a royal record, part astronomy logbook, part political calendar, part national strategy document. At the top of the page, written in rich black ink, is a date, and beneath it a note that says something roughly like, Mars is ascendant and the tides are full. Do not move the elephants. You blink. Ragava chuckles. The king asked if he could relocate the war camp across the Yamuna. We said no. You pause, because Mars.
No, because we knew the roads would flood by morning, but the Mars thing helped.
Welcome to the life of the court astronomer. These weren't just mathematicians, they were royal advisors, consultants. Some were appointed as Jyotisha Acharyas, or masters of celestial knowledge, and held actual influence over everything from tax schedules and temple construction to coronation dates and military campaigns. If the sky said wait, the king waited. You lean in to read more. One page recommends delaying a coastal trade voyage because Venus was in a low water sign. Translation: monsoon's coming, don't be a fool. Another suggests starting tax collection when the full moon aligns with Punavasu, a nakshatra associated with rebirth and favorable transactions. You chuckle. Even the IRS never tried astrology this boldly. Still, historians admit it wasn't nonsense. Much of this was coded weather data disguised in symbolic language. The priests and astronomers had tracked planetary positions long enough to connect them to real patterns. Venus, lingering in a certain constellation, might correlate with rising tides. Jupiter entering a specific house could mean early harvest rains. The sky was their calendar, but also their database. You come across a chart that tracks eclipses over a 50-year span. Each one is marked with a small event: famine, battle, royal succession. A pattern. A coincidence? Or just historical poetry? You ask the apprentice reading beside you if kings really made war decisions based on these records. He nods. Once a king postponed battle for 9 days because Saturn and Mars were in conflict. His enemy attacked anyway. Their camp was swept away by flash floods. Lucky coincidence, perhaps, he says. But history doesn't reward coincidence. It rewards caution. You can't argue with that. He points to another scroll, thinner and brittle. This one's about temple dedication ceremonies. Turns out temples were often inaugurated when the stars were in harmony, not just symbolically, but with an eye on public morale. The astrologers would choose dates where auspicious nakshatras could be seen from the temple's central axis. It wasn't just spiritual, it was PR. A well-timed dedication could spark loyalty, trust, and donations. And that brings you to the really juicy part: court politics. Astronomers sometimes played both sides of the aisle. One record details how an observatory predicted a solar eclipse just days before a crown prince was to be anointed. Bad omen, said the astronomers. postpone the ceremony. In the meantime, the king's second son with better star alignments and, let's say, a more generous relationship with the observatory's funding conveniently gained influence. Historians still argue whether this was genuine belief or clever manipulation. Either way, the sky gave cover for palace intrigue. Back in your corner, Raghav is reviewing the week's charts. A festival is coming. He needs to recommend the most auspicious moment for the opening ritual. Too early, and the priests will complain. Too late, and the market vendors will be cranky. So he consults the stars, and then quietly, he consults the weather forecast, a note written by a junior monk who's been watching the clouds and sniffing the morning wind all week. You realize something. This whole system, these observatories, these scrolls, this incense-scented bureaucracy isn't about blind faith. It's about giving people a reason to delay, a reason to hope, a reason to make the next move or stay still.
Even if the math isn't always perfect, even if Rahu isn't really a demon head.
You exhale. Somewhere in the distance a conch shell sounds. Morning rituals, the city stirs. And above it all, the stars keep moving calm, ancient, unconcerned with your empires and tax policies and elephant deployments.
Still, you know this much. They're watching.
And someone like you is watching right back. The sun isn't up yet, but the stars are getting that faded look like guests at a party who know it's time to leave but aren't quite ready. A slight breeze carries the scent of wet stone and distant rain. That's when you hear it, a low splash, then another, and a faint, rhythmic dripping. You follow the sound to a quiet corner of the observatory where a monk in a damp ochre robe is crouched over a shallow stone basin. Above him, rainwater drips slowly from the edge of the tiled roof into the bowl. He's staring at it like it holds the secrets of the universe. You ease beside him, careful not to interrupt. "This is monsoon work," he murmurs, as if you already know what that means. Turns out monsoon prediction was one of the astronomers' most important jobs. Forget romantic charts and philosophical sine curves. If the rains came early or late crops would fail, people would starve, monarchs would be blamed. The sky held the power of life and death, and it was your job to read it before it soaked the granaries. The monk takes a bamboo stylus and draws a circle in the basin. Then he carefully places a tulsi leaf in the center. You watch, trying not to blink. If the leaf drifts to the edge within a specific time frame measured with sand, not your twitchy digital watch, it can indicate subtle shifts in wind or barometric pressure. You're thinking this is either genius or madness, maybe both. But it's not just this leaf. They track cloud shapes, sunset hues, the behavior of birds. And yes, they chart planetary positions, because some ancient scholars believed certain nakshatras like Swati or Anuradha could signal the onset of monsoon winds. And they didn't just believe, they recorded. Century after century of rainfall notes lined up with constellations. Raghav appears beside you, now handing over a slate with etched patterns. These are monsoon models, geometric predictions overlaid with seasonal star charts. You stare at them. They're beautiful, complicated, slightly damp. He points at one. This pattern has occurred 6 times in the last 100 years. Each time the rains came in the 3rd week of Jeshta.
That's specific.
And somehow weirdly accurate. You've heard the stories of astronomers accurately predicting the first rainfall down to the hour, of kings waiting tense, packed court musicians hushed until a water clock confirmed the celestial signs had aligned. Historians still debate whether these predictions were always scientific, but they worked often enough that people believed, that they listened, that they waited. Back in the observatory's open gallery, you now see a few more clues of this ancient weather station. A large slab tilted toward the sky for catching the first raindrop, a carved channel for observing how water runs and pools, even the layout of the garden designed not just for beauty, but for moisture tracking. And here's the kicker, some of this was linked to mango season. You heard right.
Mangoes weren't just delicious, they were data.
The flowering of certain trees was tracked alongside the position of constellations. If the Magha nakshatra rose late, you might get fewer mangoes. if Jupiter entered Ashlesha brace for a bumper crop and a very sticky summer. Court poets even wrote mango-themed riddles wrapped in astronomical metaphors. One of them Raghava recites aloud. When the moon sleeps near Pushya, the mango stirs in its dreams. Harvest not from the impatient branch, or thunder will stain your mouth. You blink? That's oddly threatening? He nods solemnly. Poetry is how we warn each other politely. You laugh. But there's something to this. These aren't just superstitions, they're old systems, early climate science disguised in robes and rhyme. 1,000 years before meteorologists had satellites, Indian scholars watched trees, tides and stars, and they didn't just guess, they recorded, revised, debated. You walk through the garden noticing now how every small thing, where a tree is planted, where water drains, is a sensor. Low tech. Slow, but meticulous. A fig tree's new leaves, the crack of dried earth near the lotus pond, the direction of ants building a hill. You're not at a weather station, you are the weather station. Back by the rain basin, the Tulsi leaf has stopped drifting. The monk checks his sand timer, nods, and makes a chalk mark on the wall. That's the third such mark tonight. You look at the sky again. The stars are retreating now, that dull blue-grey spreading wider. But in this soft pre-dawn you finally see how astronomy, agriculture and poetry form one web. Not separate disciplines, just different ways of listening. To the sky, to the trees, to the soft plink of rainwater against stone, and of course to the mango. By now the first threads of light are sneaking into the sky, casting everything in that hushed silver blue that makes you want to whisper even when no one's around. You're walking barefoot, your sandals left near the courtyard's edge, and the stone beneath your feet is cool, slick with dew. Ahead of you stands a temple, not massive, not ostentatious, but deliberate in every line. Its walls curve inward like a lotus bud about to open. Its columns are etched with planets and animals and stars, and directly in the center of the structure, open to the air, is a square of sunlight, well, almost. The sun isn't quite up, but soon a perfect beam will hit that spot. Because this temple, like many others across India, is designed with the stars. Temple architecture wasn't just art, it was mathematics, it was astronomy in stone. You walk slowly into the shrine's central hall, past columns etched with the 12 zodiac signs, each carefully placed, each aligned with a cardinal direction. Some face toward specific nakshatras, others are set to catch light only on equinox mornings. One Raghava explains casts a lotus-shaped shadow exactly on the vernal equinox and nowhere else in the year. You pause beside that column, staring at the faint outline of the floor where the shadow will land. It's almost like the temple itself is waiting, holding its breath for the sun to arrive.
How did they do this, you whisper?
Raghava taps the stone with his knuckle. Math, memory, trial and error, and the occasional divine hunch. Indian temples often followed the Vastu Shastra, an ancient science of architecture, blending geometry, astrology, and religious symbolism. And though it's sometimes compared to Chinese feng shui, Vastu had its own obsessive logic. Every angle, every room, even the height of the spire was tuned to resonate with cosmic rhythms. You notice a square stone in the temple's floor with a tiny brass pin embedded at its center. Raghava grins. That's a gnomon, a shadow-casting pillar used for solar timekeeping. During festivals they decorate it with turmeric and flowers. A few steps away you find another odd feature, a tunnel carved beneath the floor, no wider than your wrist. For sound, someone says, behind you, or airflow, or some believe for measuring resonance during specific celestial alignments. You love that no one's quite sure, because what is science if not a beautifully organized guess? And here's the wild part. Some of these temples were so precisely designed that on certain dates light would travel through a small opening and illuminate a single deity's eye. Not the whole statue, just the eye. For exactly one moment. Then it would fade. Historians still argue whether this was achieved through sheer observational brilliance or repeated architectural tweaking over generations. Either way, the effect is spine-tingling. Ragava tells you of a temple in Tamil Nadu where the sanctum only lights up during the Chitra Purnima, the full moon of the Chaitra month. Pilgrims gather at midnight watching the moon's beam travel down the temple shaft like a whispered secret. Some weep. Others take notes. He adds, there's another one that echoes only on Guru Purnima. Sing on any other day, and it sounds flat. But on that night, the stone sings back. You raise your eyebrows, echoes based on the moon.
Stone doesn't lie, he says with a wink, but it's picky about the company it keeps.
You walk the inner ring of the shrine, tracing your fingers over carvings that feel less like decoration and more like coded instruction, constellations, time cycles, even the mythical Samudra Manthan again, the churning of the ocean. It's all here, baked into the walls. And as you step out onto the eastern platform, the light finally breaks. It slides between two columns, crawls along the stone floor, and lands exactly on that shadow-marked square. Not one finger width off. You look up. The temple ceiling has a small, almost invisible gap in the carvings. Through it, the light pours like honey, smooth and golden. It hits the lotus carving, and just for a moment the stone seems to glow. Everyone's silent. Because whether it's God or geometry or something in between, this moment feels aligned. You don't know the equation behind it, you don't need to. You just know it works. Later, you walk back to the observatory where the last hour's logs are being tucked away and the scent of breakfast is rising ghee rice cumin. But part of your mind is still in that shrine, tracing how sunbeams touched stone in a pattern carved 1,000 years ago.
And you wonder,
when the architects built it, did they smile when the first light hit the mark, or did they just nod? Say, finally, and go eat mangoes. Either way, they saw the sky in stone, and now so have you. Back in the observatory courtyard, someone is yawning with the theatrical flair of a cat. Scrolls are being gently stacked, astrolabes polished, and tucked into cotton wrappings like sleeping babies. But before the sun fully claims the sky, there's one more thing Ragava wants you to understand. The nakshatras, he says, motioning to a chart pinned beneath a bronze weight, are not just stars, they're stories. You sit back down on the sandstone bench, your legs sore from crouching, your brain pulsing gently with formulas and folktales. But you're not done yet, because the nakshatras, those 27, sometimes 28 lunar mansions, were central to everything. Time, fate, crops, love, even haircut appointments apparently. Ragava begins to recite them like a lullaby, Ashwini Bharani Kritika. You recognize a few from earlier, the ones scribbled in the marriage chart, the ones blamed for mango shortages and political divorces. Now they're lined up like an ancient cast of characters in the sky's longest-running soap opera. You're handed a fresh palm leaf scroll, the edges still curling. It's a chart of the lunar path across these nakshatras. The moon takes just over 27 days to make the full circuit, touching each one like a bead on a celestial rosary. The nakshatra system predates even many Hindu astrological traditions. It appears in the Vedas texts composed over 3,000 years ago. That's how long people have been watching the moon slide across these star clusters. And each one has its own personality. Rohini is seductive, creative. Mula is destructive, but cleansing. Pushya is nourishing. Jeshtha is powerful, a bit dramatic. Definitely the type who throws a party and then gets annoyed no one brought better gifts. It's all deeply mythological, of course, or is it? Historians still argue whether the nakshatras were based solely on observation, practical tracking of the moon's movement, or whether they were a storytelling framework grafted onto the sky later. One theory says early agriculturists tracked planting cycles via moonlight and just added drama. Another argues they were based on real regional climate patterns tied to those star alignments.
Probably both.
You look up at the dawn sky, paling now the stars fading into memory. You imagine seeing the moon pass over Magga, whose deity is associated with ancestors and rituals. Maybe that's when a family would light a lamp or clean the kitchen with extra care. Maybe they wouldn't even know why, just that Grandma said it was the right day. Back in the courtyard, the junior students are playing a game assigning modern personalities to nakshatras. Rohini would be a social media influencer with a side hustle in organic soaps, one says.
Ashlishar, another counters, definitely a politician who always speaks in riddles.
You laugh, and you realize these weren't just star clusters. They were the ancient Indian version of archetypes, not just signs in the sky, but mirrors of human nature. Still, the nakshatras weren't always used to tell stories. Sometimes they were pure logistics. You flip through another scroll and see a trade ledger from centuries ago. Next to each entry, clove, shipment, pearl, merchant, grain taxes, is a nakshatra marking. Why? Because contract dates, departure times, even market openings were chosen based on what constellation the moon was cuddling with that night. One fringe scroll even claims a merchant refused to deliver goods during Revati because it made his camels sneeze. Take that as you will. Ragava points you to a small dome in the observatory's southwest corner. It's built specifically to track the moon's transit across the nakshatras using angled mirrors and a slit in the ceiling that catches moonlight just right. You climb up and find the mirrors dusty but still functional. Each nakshatra takes just over a day to pass, meaning if you stayed up every night for a month, you could watch the moon's entire sky dance. And some did. In fact, you suspect Raghava has, several times. Down below, a scholar is copying a line from a 10th century almanac. You lean over and read it. When the moon enters Anuradha, the bees stir early, and the water buffalo refuse to cross the river. You smile. You're not sure what the buffalo know, but you know this ancient people paid very close attention. Still, even within this vast lunar system, there were debates. How many nakshatras should there be? 27, as traditionally accepted, or 28, if you include Abhijit, that fleeting and often omitted one. Historians still argue that one, but maybe the point isn't precision, maybe it's continuity. A way to hold the rhythm of time in your hands, to match your life, your work, your hopes, your weird urge to dye your sari blue on Thursdays with the moon's slow procession across a web of stars. And even now, as the morning light spills across the stone floor, you can feel the tug of those ancient names. Soft, mythic, familiar. The stars are no longer visible, but the nakshatras remain, etched on stone,
Scratched onto palm leaves.
whispered into rituals.
Alive in memory.
The stars are gone now, swallowed by morning light, but your night isn't over. Not quite. Raghava waves you toward a crumbling stone stairway on the eastern side of the observatory, one you hadn't noticed before. You climb it, slowly, legs stiff, each step grooved from centuries of slippered feet. At the top, a view hills spreading like waves, rooftops catching gold, a narrow dirt road threading through the countryside. And moving along that road, a slow procession of camels, ox carts and dusty scholars in layered shawls and travel-stained sandals. Travelers, but not merchants or monks. These are astronomers. You step aside as they enter the courtyard, quietly greeted by Raghava, who bows low to the eldest. You watch as bundles are unwrapped, revealing not goods, but tools, folded star maps, cylindrical instruments, bronze dials and scrolls in Arabic, Persian, Sanskrit, and even some writing you don't recognize at all. This isn't a local gathering. This is a crossroads of sky watchers. Raghava turns to you, eyes twinkling. They've come from Gujarat, Delhi, even Samarkand. The monsoon is over. Travel is safe. Time to exchange what we've learned. You suddenly realize astronomy wasn't a lonely pursuit. It was a network, a living constellation of scholars stretching across the subcontinent and beyond, connected not by telegraphs or emails, but by a shared obsession with where Mars would be next Tuesday. One visitor unpacks a manuscript written on fine goat parchment ink, still crisp borders, dyed with indigo and turmeric. It's from a Persian observatory, and it contains alternate planetary tables, ones that include a different method for calculating lunar parallax. Raghava reads it carefully, brow furrowed, and murmurs they're still using Al-Biruni's base units. Interesting. You lean in. Wait, Al-Biruni, the 11th century Persian polymath who came to India and basically binge-watched Indian science and religion before writing a 1,000-page review that Al-Biruni, yes, that one, he wasn't the only one either. Indian astronomers regularly exchanged ideas with their Islamic counterparts, sometimes via long-distance letters, sometimes in person, and sometimes, as Raghava admits, through smugglers who also carried saffron and gossip. The cross-pollination was real. Arabic texts had already absorbed Greek ideas, Ptolemy Aristotle, Hipparchus, and by the time they circled into Indian hands, they were richer, still layered with new math, better instruments, and the sharp Persian eye for categorization. In turn, Indian scholars contributed their own cycles corrections and deeply refined lunar models. You sit with a young traveller from the West who's unfurling a scroll marked in red ink with notations for eclipses across 3 empires. He laughs when you point at a mistake. Apparently someone miscopied a digit and accidentally predicted an eclipse during a dry season when no one would have even looked up. You ask how he became an astronomer.
I was supposed to be a calligrapher, he says, but I couldn't stop staring at the stars instead of my ink.
Of course, someone else produces a celestial globe etched with constellations from 3 traditions, Greek, Indian, and Arabic. You spot Orion Mriga and Al-Jabbar, all overlapping like old friends in different costumes.
And it hits you, no one owns the sky.
But everyone tells its story. One traveller begins boiling lentils on a small stove, and within minutes, the observatory smells like cardamom and wood smoke. Others gather around a flat stone sharing dried figs, and what might be fermented barley. You're handed a sweet dumpling shaped like a crescent moon. Raghava jokes a snack fit for Rahu. Snack. They talk late into the morning, sharing data, comparing instruments. One heated debate breaks out about whether the moon's apparent size could be modelled as a sine curve, modified by the angle of sunlight reflection. Another traveller leans over and whispers, "They've been arguing about that for 20 years. You sip some of the barley drink, it's terrible, but you keep drinking, because you realise you're sitting at the ancient version of an academic conference. No PowerPoints, no lanyards, just minds burning through questions like lamps burning sesame oil. Somewhere in the background, a scribe is copying formulas onto fresh palm leaves. A boy is sketching a diagram of a star tracker he's never seen before. And an old scholar is teaching a new apprentice how to pack instruments for camel travel, leather wrapping cotton padding turmeric dust to keep the humidity at bay. You ask Raghava what happens when disagreements can't be resolved. He shrugs. Then we wait for the sky to decide. You like that? You look around at the dusty bags, the different skin tones, the blending of languages, the shared nods when someone says nakshatra or zawiya. These are people who've never seen each other before, but they've all seen Saturn's rings, or at least suspected them. They've all stayed up too late, ruined their eyesight, and dropped ink on priceless charts. They're family, connected not by blood or border, but by starlight. And in that moment, with your terrible barley tea, your aching knees and the sunrise tickling the stone walls, you feel part of it too. One tiny eye in a vast network of watchers, tracing light, mapping wonder, and arguing politely about planetary loops over breakfast. The sky is full now, broad daylight, soft and buttery. Shadows stretch across the observatory like lazy cats curling behind stone benches and slipping under the edges of open scrolls. You're not tired anymore. You've gone past tired. You're in that gently stunned, tea-fueled state where everything feels slow and meaningful, like you've been handed a secret you don't quite understand, but somehow trust. And just when you think you've reached the quiet part of the morning, someone strikes a note.
A low ringing
You turn your head. In a side pavilion near the mango grove, a student is tuning a Rudra Veena, a long, graceful stringed instrument that hums like a whisper when plucked. Another holds a bamboo flute. A third, still wearing ink-stained robes, is unrolling a sheet of palm leaf notation so intricate it looks more like embroidery than music. What is this, you ask Raghava, stepping carefully around a bowl of oil meant to appease Mars. Planetary music, he says, graha ragas. Oh, of course, because when you've spent the whole night measuring eclipses, squinting at mango trees, and arguing over sine functions, the logical next step is to compose a raga for Mercury. You sit down as the Veena begins to play a slow, descending scale that feels like it's dripping down the spine of the sky. The flute joins in. The morning birds quiet as if listening. It's all very gentle, until the drummer joins in with a rhythm so complex it may be sending coded messages to Saturn. Turns out medieval Indian scholars believed that each planet, not just a wandering light in the sky, carried with it a mood and emotional resonance. And those emotions were translated into musical scales. Shani Saturn was slow, melancholic. Buddha Mercury was lively, clever, unpredictable. Chandra the moon called for romantic ragas with rising trills, perfect for full moon festivals and extremely dramatic court poetry. The idea wasn't unique to India. Ancient Greeks spoke of the music of the spheres, and Islamic philosophers like Al-Farabi mused on planetary harmonics, but in India they took it further. They composed with it, lived with it. Sometimes entire ceremonies were built around playing a raga that matched the planetary alignment of the moment. Think of it as the ultimate celestial playlist. And yes, historians still debate whether the system had any measurable effect on mood or memory. But the idea that sound could echo the sky, that's just gorgeous. The flutist now changes to a minor scale, a raga linked to Ketu, the headless shadow planet from the eclipse tale. The music tilts strange, dissonant, curling in on itself like a dream that's already fading as you wake. You get goosebumps. You glance over at the student playing the Veena. His eyes are closed, not with effort, with something else. Reverence, memory, or maybe just the pure mathematical beauty of a note that lands exactly where it should. And it dawns on you that everything you've learned, everything you've witnessed all night, has its resonance. The stars and their patterns, the stories wrapped around Mars and mango trees, the numbers that curve like music, the ragas that bend like shadows, it's all part of the same tuning system. You ask Raghava whether they record these compositions. He shakes his head. Some things are meant to be played once, like a comet, or a good argument about lunar parallax. But some melodies do linger. One student hums a phrase that sounds suspiciously like the angle of Jupiter's rise. Another plucks a pattern matching the sidereal day. It's like they're transcribing the sky, not in ink, but in vibration. And here's the real surprise: they play to stay awake. Apparently one of the challenges of all-night astronomical study, aside from the obvious tea shortages and occasional snake in the archives, is sheer fatigue. So music helps. It sharpens focus, keeps minds from drifting too far into sleep, or alternately it eases the descent into sleep when the work is done. As the raga softens, the sun climbs higher, the courtyard glows gold. Even the parrots on the neem tree have quieted down to listen.
You don't take notes anymore. There's nothing left to measure, just something to feel.
The Veena draws out one final long note. It fades into the morning air like steam. Someone yawns, someone else sighs. Raghava for the first time just smiles. And in that silence you realize the last part of being an astronomer isn't watching or measuring or even arguing about Mercury's retrograde motion. It's learning how to listen to sound, to sky, to silence. The observatory has grown still. Not the hush of waiting, but the kind that follows fulfillment. Instruments are cleaned and packed, scrolls wrapped and returned to their cedar-lined boxes. No one rushes. Everything moves at the pace of dust settling. You sit on the same bench where you started the night, though now your back aches and your mind feels twice as heavy. Raghava brings over the last palm leaf bundle, a thick roll bound with a red thread that frays like the edge of a monk's robe. He places it in your lap with unexpected reverence.
It's the final logbook, not just of stars or weather or measurements, but of the night itself.
One apprentice is tasked with summarizing what happened, sky positions, anomalies, observations, and, well, yes, comet sightings, eclipse rehearsals, musical notes, a tulsi leaf that didn't drift as expected. All of it goes in. Raghava scratches his beard and mutters, "Should we include the part where you almost tripped over the gnomon?" You nod solemnly. The people deserved the truth. He chuckles, then leans back against a stone pillar, face turned toward the rising sun. You realize he's been awake for almost 30 hours.
How often do you do this, you ask?
He blinks slowly, thoughtful, every month, sometimes more. The sky never stays still.
And that's it, isn't it?
You think back over the night, the lunar charts, the mango predictions, the love letters disguised as horoscopes, the brass astrolabes spinning like a whisper in your hand, Rahu swallowing the moon in a pageant of cosmic revenge, the music vibrating with planetary moods, the scholars arriving with scrolls and sour barley tea, laughing about camels and equations. It wasn't just astronomy, it was intimacy with the sky. You flip through the logbook's final pages and notice something strange: empty lines, a blank space, no heading, no notes. Why's this part empty, you ask? Ragava looks over. That's for you. You freeze. Meh. Each night writes itself, but we always leave space for the newest stargazer. You're not sure what to say. You want to say a lot of things, that you don't know enough, that you're just a visitor, that your handwriting is terrible, but instead you reach for the stylus. The ink is still wet.
And you begin to write.
Not formulas, your math is embarrassingly poor, but something else, a memory, a thought, a simple note. The moon was late tonight, but still beautiful. Venus flickered harder than usual. And I think I understood Saturn for a moment before the tea wore off. You sign your name in the corner, small, crooked, a guest signature on the sky's guest book. Ragava nods satisfied. It'll be there next month when someone else reads it. Below the bench, a cat emerges from nowhere and curls around your ankle. A temple bell rings distantly, calling the priests to morning prayer. The wind shifts and the smell of ghee and fried flour creeps across the courtyard. Someone's making breakfast. And finally, the sky's bright. The night is over. You feel your eyes grow heavy, but not from exhaustion, from completion, from calm. You did it. You made it through a night with India's ancient astronomers, and they quietly, gently welcomed you in. Now everything softens. The heat of the sun spreads slow and sweet across the stone floor, warming the chill left behind by the night. You lie back just slightly enough to feel the earth under you and the weight of everything you've seen resting lightly on your chest. A few birds begin their morning songs, not loud, just scattered chirps like punctuation at the end of a long, careful paragraph. You watch the sky. It's blue now, pure and clean, no longer filled with the questions of constellations or omens or the backwards motion of Mars. It's just sky, plain and full and eternal, the kind of sky that's seen 1,000 nights of observation and will see 1,000 more after you're gone. You take a breath, slow, easy, let it out longer than it came in. You hear the soft footfalls of students tidying up behind you, the rustle of pages being closed, the faint pluck of a final string still vibrating with memory. The cat purrs somewhere near your feet. The stars may be gone from view now, but their stories linger. Their rhythms still hum faintly under your skin. And maybe the next time you look up at the night sky, whether from a rooftop, a campsite, or just your bedroom window, you'll remember this. The moon's crooked smile, the comet's blaze, the whispered math of mangoes, and the sound of a raga written for Saturn. You close your eyes. The observatory sleeps now, and so do you.